Human civilizations have been constantly waging wars to seize new lands. In the 15th century BC, the rivalry between the Egyptian and Hittite kingdoms began. In those days, the Egyptians worshipped a pantheon of gods, headed by Amun-Ra. The Hittites prayed to the storm god Tessup. At the border between the two kingdoms, the Egyptians and the Hittites often clashed with each other to capture the Kadish fortress. Since the end of the 4th millennium BC, the most ancient human civilization has grown in Egypt on the banks of the Nile River flowing through the sandy desert. To glorify their gods and rulers, the Egyptian people created grandiose constructions, pyramids, monuments, temples, and obelisks that still leave a lasting impression on our contemporaries. From dynasty to dynasty, pharaohs of Upper and Lower Egypt aggrandized the power of the Egyptian kingdom by the conquest of neighboring kingdoms and tribes. By the 14th century BC, the Egyptian empire had become an absolute monarchy ruled by the pharaoh, worshipped as a living god on earth. However, during the rule of the pharaoh Akhenaten and Queen Nefertiti, who undertook a religious reform, the Egyptian kingdom lost some of its might. The essence of the reform was to replace the pantheon of gods headed by the god Amun-Ra with only one god of the sun, Aten. While Egypt was caught up in the struggle between the pharaoh and the sacrificers, the central part of Asia Minor saw the rise of a mighty Hittite empire ruled by Suppiluiluma I. The Hittites came to this hilly land from an unknown place and conquered the local tribes. The religious, political, and economic center of the Hittite Empire was the city of Hattusa. During the rule of many Hittite kings, the city was the capital of the empire. Here, a number of cuneiform clay tablets and hieroglyphic inscriptions on rocks were found, which later helped us to know the history of the Hittites. The Hittites were among the best fortress builders in the ancient Near East. An example of their art can be seen among the southern fortifications of Hattusa, the Yerkapi fortification, built on a piece of highland which has survived to the present day. The foundations of the fortress walls and towers were constructed upon earthworks or a natural highland. The Hittites built 2 stone foundations without any mortar and filled the empty room between them with rubble. Upon this base structure, they built walls up to 8 meters high and towers up to 12 meters high made of mud bricks. In order to enhance the defensive capacity, the rampart or the slope of the hill where the fortress walls stood was made of stone. Such peculiarity made it difficult for enemies to approach the fortress walls when they launched an assault on Hattusa. Side stone stairs allowed Hittite soldiers to come down to the base of the rampart to attack the enemy. Under the fortifications, there were underpasses inside the rampart which were used by Hattusa defenders for sorties from the fortress into the rear area of the enemy army. The southern gate of the fortress was of ceremonial nature. It was decorated by sphinx figures, and one of them has survived to the present day. The Lion Gate in the western fortifications of Hattusa is well known. The lion was a symbol of strength and power in the ancient Near East. Sets of lion sculptures were installed on either side of this gate. Every traveler passing through the Lion Gate realized he was entering a great city. In the eastern fortifications of Hattusa, the King's Gate can be found, with a sloped access road to the gate. Double fortress walls and a watchtower at the entrance made the gate an impregnable structure for an enemy besieging Hattusa. The gate is called King's because of the relief of the god Saruma installed in the inner side of the gate. The god Saruma was the son of the storm god Tessup and the sun goddess of Arina Heput. The site of the belligerent god was meant to defend Hattusa from the east. The king's residence was situated in the castle inside the city of Hattusa, protected by mighty fortress walls and towers. The foundations of these walls and towers, as well as those of the large residential and utility premises inside the fortress, have survived to the present day. When Hattusa was the capital, the entire kingdom was ruled from here. The Hittite Empire was in itself a constitutional monarchy. Hittite kings allowed ruling dynasties of conquered kingdoms to pass on their power to their offspring. The basis of the Hittite Empire was its army. Infantrymen were armed with spears, and for their protection they had a shield, a set of armor, and a helmet. The crushing power of the Hittite army was provided by its chariots. Like the Egyptians, the Hittites borrowed this element of their army from the Hyksos, the kings of shepherds, back in the 15th century BC. In the 13th century BC, a battle chariot of the Hittites held 3 warriors, a charioteer, a shield-bearer, and a spearman, as it is shown in the Egyptian reliefs of the Ramesseum Temple, the mortuary temple of Ramses II. The Hittites were experienced and skilled warriors in the art of besieging and capturing fortresses, as can be seen from the relief. Religion was the power uniting the Hittites around the ruling dynasty. In the great temple they prayed to their gods headed by the storm god Tessup and his wife, the sun goddess of Arina Heput. The temple was large and had a big courtyard and sanctuaries, where there stood statues of the main Hattusa gods. Only the king, the queen, and the sacrificers who looked after the place could enter the temple. Other citizens offered their sacrifices in the temple courtyard. Not far from Hattusa, the Yazilikaya rock sanctuary is situated. In the rocks of this sanctuary, a picture was cut out showing the procession of gods and goddesses of the Hittite pantheon moving from opposite directions to meet each other. The central scene of the sacred procession features the god Tessup and the goddess Heput. The founder of the Neo-Hittite Empire, Suppiluiluma I, conquered new lands, extending the territories where people worshipped the god Tessup. Meanwhile, the Egyptian pharaoh Akhenaten dies. He is succeeded by Smenkhkare, married to the elder daughter of Akhenaten, Meritaten. But Smenkhkare dies soon, and the 9-year-old Tutankhamun rises to the throne, already married to the third daughter of Akhenaten and Nefertiti, the young Ankhesenpatan. The sacrificer of Amun, A, receives the post of warden for the royal family. Under A's pressure, the old gods together with Amun-Ra are worshipped once again, and this leads to a restoration of order in Egypt. However, Tutankhamun soon dies, and Queen Ankhesenamun writes a letter to the Hittite king with a request for his son to marry her. The Hittite prince rushes to Egypt but is killed. Neither the sacrificer A nor the warlord Horemheb could allow the Hittites to capture the throne of Egypt. The old A comes to the throne later, succeeded by Horemheb. However, Horemheb died, leaving no heirs. The throne was succeeded by the founder of the 19th dynasty, the old Ramses I, who had been one of the army commanders for Pharaoh Horemheb. His son Seti I became the co-regent, and after his father's death he came to the throne, marrying one of the princesses. In the 9th year of his rule, Ramesses, the elder son of Seti I, became the co-regent. Ramesses completed the mortuary temple of Seti I at Abydos in order to affirm the power of the new dynasty. The young pharaoh took great efforts to glorify the god Amun-Ra by renewing the construction of a grandiose temple in Karnak. Ramesses believed that his efforts in glorifying the god Amun-Ra would be rewarded, and the Egyptian empire would become the greatest empire in the world again. The Egyptians built a number of temples in honor of the Theban triad, consisting of the god Amun-Ra, his wife the goddess Mut, and their son, the god Khonsu. In addition to the Theban triad, the Egyptians also prayed and offered sacrifices to the gods Ra-Harakti, Ptah, Osiris, the goddess Isis, and other gods as well. Pharaoh Ramses II, who came to the throne under the personal name of Ra-Mesi-Su-Meri-Amun, meaning born by Ra and favored by Amun, had to defend Egypt against its enemies with the help of the army. Egyptian infantrymen were protected by shields and used spears in battle. In close combat, they fought with a sickle sword called khopesh. Infantrymen were organized into divisions named after Egyptian gods. The pharaoh's personal guard consisted of the Sherdin, who were prisoner pirates from the island of Sardinia. They agreed to serve the pharaoh and underwent a special training. In the Battle of Kadish, they helped the pharaoh avoid captivity. The main crushing power of the Egyptian army, like that of the Hittites, was chariots. The Egyptian type of chariot carried 2 warriors, one of them a charioteer driving 2 horses who was at the same time a shield-bearer and an archer. Archers could hit the enemy with arrows from a distance of up to 800 steps. In the 5th year of his rule, Ramses led his troops to the Syrian city of Kadesh. Having learned of the approach of the Egyptians, the Hittite king Muvattala mobilized the troops of his country and the dependent kingdoms and ordered his army to go to Kadesh as well. The Syrian fortress Kadish was built on a hill to the north of the Bekaa Valley, which is situated between 2 of the Lebanon mountain ranges. To the right of the hill flows the Orontes River, and to the left, the Al-Muqaddiya tributary. A canal was dug between them. A month after the expedition began, the army of Ramses left the Bekaa Valley lying between the Lebanon mountain ranges and entered the Syrian plain. Meanwhile, the Hittite troops led by King Muvattala, consisting of infantrymen and chariots, approached Kadesh from the side of the city of Aleppo. Approaching the Orontes River, the Egyptian patrol captured 2 local Bedouins. They deceived the pharaoh by saying that the Hittite troops had not come to Kadesh yet and were far in the north at that time. The young pharaoh believed them, and this turned out to be a fatal mistake for the Egyptians. Their army kept on moving in the common order, their warlords unaware of the enemy's location. As a matter of fact, the Hittites settled near the fortress, hidden behind the hill, where they were not seen by the enemy. The Egyptian troops were divided into 4 divisions with 5,000 infantrymen each, named after gods of the Egyptian pantheon. Amun, Ra, Ptah, and Seth crossed the plain before the Kadish fortress, approached the Orontes River near the Shabtuna settlement, and started preparing to cross the river via a ford. Relying on false information, Pharaoh Ramses ordered the army to cross the river, while he himself quickly went to the northwest of the fortress, leading the division of Amun. The Hittite army, led by King Muvattala, started maneuvering to the walls of Kadish in order to hide from the Egyptians. The Egyptians built a camp near Kadish. The division of Ra slowly crosses the Orontes River and marches towards the camp. At the same time, the division of 2,500 Hittite chariots crossed the Orontes River near Kadesh and was deployed to attack the Egyptian columns. The Hittite chariot detachment attacked the Egyptians. Chariots smash into the center of the division of Ra, killing everyone in their way. The Hittite attack was unexpected for the Egyptians, moving in marching order, so they could not offer much resistance. The division of Ra was crushed, and the survivors fled to the pharaoh's camp. Overwhelmed by the Hittite attack, the Egyptians could not defend themselves properly and were dispersed. Realizing that he was trapped, Pharaoh Ramses organized the defense of his camp. Hittite chariots surround the camp and try to break the resistance of the Egyptians. The pharaoh and his guards are fighting the Hittites. While being surrounded, Pharaoh Ramses demonstrated personal courage while fighting the enemy and organized sufficient resistance. In the fight, the Egyptians were in a more favorable position because the Hittite chariots were keeping a tight formation and interfered with each other. Many of the Hittites reached the center of the camp and started plundering the king's tent, forgetting about the battle raging on. At a decisive moment for both the Egyptians and Pharaoh Ramses, who could be taken prisoner by the Hittites, the auxiliary Egyptian detachment entered the battlefield from the direction of the Mediterranean shore. This detachment hit the rear of the Hittite army, forced them back, and joined with the king's guards. Led by the pharaoh, the Egyptians put pressure on the Hittites, driving them to the Orontes River. Muvattala sent 1,000 chariots to help his retreating troops. However, at the same time, the camp is approached by the division of Ptah. Deployed into battle order, it moves in to attack the Hittites. Seeing the Egyptian reinforcements arrive, the Hittite chariots fell back and left the battlefield. Part of them came back to the troops on the right bank of the Orontes River, and another part retreated to the fortress. On that spring day, the battle in the plain near Kadish fortress ended in a draw. Neither Ramses nor Muvattala dared to start a new fight, and the troops retreated to their camps. Upon his return from Syria, Ramses depicted his miraculous escape in the Battle of Kadesh in all temples of the god Amun-Ra. The main temple of the god Amun-Ra in Karnak, near Thebes, today known as Luxor, was built over 3 centuries. It is the largest temple in Egypt. The rulers of Egypt tried to decorate the temple of Karnak devoted to Amun-Ra. In his honor, they built chapels, obelisks, and sanctuaries, and erected statues to the gods and to themselves. The object of pride for the Temple of Karnak is the great hypostyle hall, having 134 columns. In this stone-made forest, the sacrificers said prayers to Amun-Ra and offered sacrifices. Pharaoh Ramses II paid much attention to the decoration of the Temple of Karnak. Ramses ordered the creation of reliefs representing the Battle of Kadish on the outer wall of the great hypostyle hall. These reliefs depict episodes of this battle, including the one where the pharaoh alone, helped by the god Amun-Ra, resists all attempts of the Hittites to take him prisoner. In the ancient Egyptian city of the 100-gated Thebes, the main temple was also devoted to the triad, the god Amun-Ra, his wife the goddess Mut, and their son the god Khonsu. Ramses ordered to add one more pylon there, to erect his own colossal statues in front of that and install obelisks in his honor. On the walls of the first pylon of the temple, Ramses also ordered the painting of scenes from the Battle of Kadish. The painting to the right shows the pharaoh at the council with his warlords, and the one to the left depicts the pharaoh attacking the enemy with the support of the god Amun-Ra well before the reinforcements arrive. By all his actions, Ramses the Great tried to thank the god Amun-Ra for the help he delivered to the pharaoh during the Battle of Kadish. The Theban temple is further proof of that. The building process was personally overseen by the pharaoh. By erecting new structures in the temple, Ramses showed that he, as a pharaoh, was worthy of his godly guardian. He tried to change the outcome of the Battle of Kadish from ending in a draw to his favor. The god Amun-Ra helped him escape imprisonment, and moreover, he helped him to defeat the Hittites, who were supported by the 1,000 gods of the Hittite pantheon. The god Amun-Ra and the deified pharaoh Ramesses became the main characters in the new developments of the Temple of Luxor. In the south of Egypt, in Nubia, which was conquered by the Egyptians in the times of its earlier dynasties, Ramesses ordered the cutting of the great temple in the rock of Abu Simbel, in honor of the god Amun-Ra and the deified pharaoh Ramesses, and the small temple in honor of the goddess Hathor and his favorite wife Nefertari. Inside the great temple, there were reliefs showing episodes of the Battle of Kadish and the personal gallantry of Ramesses. This temple, built far from Syria, was a reminder to local tribes about what awaited them if they ever tried to rebel against the godlike pharaoh, who was supported by the god Amun-Ra himself. The grandiose temples of Abu Simbel were the symbols of the eternal power of the pharaoh over the lands to the south of the first rapids of the Nile River. The peoples living here brought the Egyptian treasury incalculable wealth by way of taxes. The scenes of the Battle of Kadish in the hot African province of Egypt show that nothing could destroy the power of the pharaoh, so it is better to show humility before him, his wife, and their heirs. Until the end of the Egyptian Empire, Nubia remained its colony. Pharaoh Ramses also marked his participation in the Battle of Kadish in the mortuary temple Ramesseum near the Valley of the Kings where he was buried. In the mortuary temple Ramesseum, dubbed this way by the famous researcher of Egypt Champollion, there lies the well-known colossus of the King of Kings, weighing more than 1,000 tons. In the majestic mortuary temple, Ramses ordered the carving of reliefs telling of all the events in his long life as the King of Egypt. Glorifying the god of the dead Osiris, Ramses asserts that he lived his life in a proper way. On the second pylon of the temple, the pharaoh wished to have reliefs that show Ramses defeating Hittite enemies. Ramses the Great on a wonderful chariot and his domestic lion fill the cunning Asians with consternation and defeat them. Reliefs of the Battle of Kadish in the Temple of Ramesseum point out again that even after his death, Ramses the Great believed this battle to be an important event of his life. In Abydos, a sacred place for the Egyptians, Pharaoh Ramses built a temple devoted to the god Osiris. Abydos was a cultic place for the god Osiris, the ruler of the netherworld of the dead. The temple's walls still keep the colored reliefs, depicting the offering of gifts to the gods in the name of the pharaoh. In one of the temple's chapels, there is a sculptural composition devoted to the gods Osiris, Isis, Amun-Ra, and the deified Ramses II. The temple was devoted to the god Osiris, and the reliefs on the walls indicate that Ramses worshipped the king of the dead. But even here, the reliefs of the outer walls feature scenes from the Battle of Kadish. Ramses the Great remembered this battle throughout his long life and thanked the god Amun-Ra for his miraculous escape. However, within 15 years he came to terms with losing the Kadish fortress and agreed to hold peace talks with the new Hittite king Hattusili III. The provisions of the peace treaty were formulated. A copy of the treaty on a clay cuneiform tablet is now kept at the Istanbul Archaeological Museum. Ramses ordered the carving of hieroglyphs from the provisions of the peace treaty between the Egyptian and the Hittite kingdoms onto the wall of Ascalon. This peace treaty allowed the two great empires of the 13th century BC to stand against other kingdoms. The numerous enemies of the Egyptians were afraid of direct collision with them, which is mentioned in the Bible. From the history of humankind, we know that this was the only peace treaty that was never broken. Such was the end of the great confrontation of the ancient kingdoms. Ramses the Great married a daughter of the Hittite king and thus improved the friendly ties between Egyptians and Hittites. During the next century, all issues of world politics were decided by these two empires, while the other kingdoms had to obey their decisions. But that was not for long. The powerful pressure from the east of Assyria, and especially from the west by the sea peoples, the Achaeavans, led to the fall of the Hittite kingdom. The peace treaty between the two great kingdoms concluded after the Battle of Kadesh can be seen as an example for all humans on how the people of the earth should find a common ground for peace and prosperity.